Hi, welcome to Speakeasy. I'm Hayley.
And I'm Jenny.
And today we're going to talk about launch versus legacy events. So how do we approach it from the very beginning? We've both got different experiences on this. I think we've worked on both, but I've done quite a lot of launch. You've done quite a lot of legacy events.
Yeah, legacy or just like big, strong brands behind the event. So the events might be relatively new, maybe like 2 years or something like that, but with a strong backing of a brand, which probably is my preference if I had to choose.
But there are entirely different approaches in the beginning, aren't they? And it comes down to that first stage of conference production for us, isn't it? Where we need to research. We need to establish what's interesting to the audience. What do our stakeholders want to know? From a business perspective as well, what is worth looking at with this event? What's going to be commercially viable? Mm-hmm. And so we can delve a little bit more into it. So.
Yeah, I think the thing with launch events, and why I say I probably prefer the legacy, is I think a lot of times companies don't realize that the production cycle might need to be changed slightly when it's a launch, because we expect it to be the same amount of weeks that it takes, and really the amount of work, the amount of, as we say, stalking for our speakers changes. Like, you are going in quite cold, and to a lot of people who might not know the event or the brand. And I think that's when things are a bit difficult, and why I kind of say I prefer legacy, because it takes maybe one email or two to get response versus 5.
But you've got an established network there, and that's the reason that it doesn't need to be as maybe long as when I do a production cycle for legacy for launch. Sorry. So, I mean, I can talk to that, where I've done a number of launch events, and actually it's launch could be if you're doing an entirely first time event for a new publication or a publication that's established, but it could be the topic is new, or they're deciding to launch kind of an events arm of their business. I've done a lot where we've done new geographical locations, mostly in the UK, but I think you'd agree that most publications will do their main event in London.
Yeah.
Be that central hub. That's where a lot of, I would say, their commercial partners are going to be based. And then that audience, especially in the south, it's easy enough to get into via trains, public transport, however, or if they're driving in, and there's lots of options. But for a northern audience, it's a lot more difficult. And as somebody that actually grew up in the southwest, I very rarely went to London when I was younger, and most people I know in that area very rarely go to London. And I think up north it's even more like that. People don't want to travel the time. I now live up in the Midlands, and it can take me 4 hours to come down to London. It's a long time. And not just that, you've then got the cost. Trains are expensive here in the UK. We'll hate it.
Yeah.
If you're coming down for a 1 day conference as well, and all of that time, that's a lot to take out on the day, and then you're tired the next day, so that's going to impact 2 days. And if it's a multi-day event, then you've got to pay the accommodation, and hotel costs are rising in London. So it's a massive expense to take that time out of the business. And whether you're somebody that runs your own business, that's a cost to you directly, or is your company going to pay for it? And often enough, if it's that huge of an expense, you need to really establish the value of that event. So when it came to some of my launch events, we were looking at northern editions of a lot of the flagships that we were doing. And it's interesting starting the research process for that, because normally where I would start with a research process, I'd start with things like maybe looking at political policy and what are the kind of key trends in terms of content for an event. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to a launch event, I'm looking at what do you want and what is going to make you show up. So that could be anything from the location, how's the transport, how's the parking, how far are you willing to travel, and then figuring out from your maybe established audience up in that region, where are they hubbed, and where then is a good place to put that event first. I think that's where I would start. That's where I've always started.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. You were saying about an event in the north, because I think I once helped out a team with an event up north, and I remember quickly thinking, this is quite the pain to get to if you don't have a car. So I really hope that most of the delegates have been sorted out where they live nearby or whatever, because it wasn't as easy, but probably it's more of a pain for these delegates to come down to London. And there's definitely quite the London focus on events, as you said.
Yeah.
Which actually, I don't know if you found that. I think I've spoken to delegates before who've come down from up north, and their frustration is that the people who come to events in London will literally pop in for 2 hours.
Yeah.
They're delegates who come, they listen to the one speaker that they want, and then kind of like leave. And you've got all this like delegates who've traveled a lot to come to this event who are eventually just networking amongst themselves because the Londoners have all left.
No, but it's true. And I mean, up north, thankfully, most people actually do drive. You need it. Whereas in London, it's more rare if you have a car, especially if you're London or even on the outskirts and you're just relying on transport. But I mean, actually, I went to the Excel last week, I think it was, and to attend the meeting show, which is an events industry trade show. And I was there for the whole day of day 2. But day 1, I was only there for 2 hours. And I did that. I popped in, even though I came from North, I had another event in the afternoon that I was working. And I just popped in that day. And so your point is right there. Like, people will pop in on events. And yeah, if you're maybe coming from further afield and you want to get that full value,
you're missing that networking element from the events. But I guess like in the launch, what have you struggled with most when it came to launching an event?
I would say I think that genuinely location, it's quite the TV show, location. That would be the hardest thing, is establishing where is the best point to put the event, whether you're looking at something like maybe Birmingham or Liverpool, or it's all these considerations. Do you go as far as Scotland? Do you go up to Edinburgh and Glasgow, which have amazing venues up there, but is the audience going to travel that far? Are they going to go somewhere like Newcastle, or are you cutting out your Midlands kind of area or closer to Wales? And so I think it's really hard there when you're not just relying on where maybe a London audience is, already there. You've got to think about how all of your people are going to be getting to the venue. And then so it feels like half the time actually when I start the research, where normally my research phase would really focus on content and speakers, that research phase, I'm looking for a viable business case to go back to my event director, to senior leadership, to the event team to say, this is where we should be doing this event. And it's funny that comes down to who I'm speaking to, and that will be delegates and sponsors and speakers, big voices in those regions as well.
Yeah, I think, what I've actually struggled with launch and why sometimes I don't particularly have enjoyed them, it's actually come to the opposite of essentially directors coming to me saying, we are launching this event. This is the date. This is the venue. Everything's been booked. It's on this topic. Go and do it. And they've not even given me the time to validate any of it, see if there's a need for this event. Does the market want it? And then you get started and you already find out those dates. Well, actually, it happens to be a holiday that week that you've decided in that, maybe not for us, but in that country, because I've done sometimes international events. Or really like the demand isn't fully there. There might be a demand from sponsors, because I think sometimes that's where launch events do come from. Sometimes it is a sponsor coming in saying, if you run this event, we will sponsor. And then you're trying to create an event around something that isn't necessarily there, the appetite from the market. And so you end up having to almost force this event into existence when you're just constantly coming with people who don't really want to speak or don't really want to engage, or you're constantly getting excuses from speakers. And I think that's been my issue with legacies, with launch, is that, I've never really been given actually the time of being like, we are thinking this idea, go and validate, come to us and see if this event should be something we could run. It's always just been like, we have an idea and we're running it.
No, I think you need to do that extra work in the beginning. And that's why when we say that production cycle needs to be longer in the beginning, because that validation is so important, because you don't want to put all that time, energy and money into an event without knowing that commercially it's going to be viable and it's going to have interest. But that's what I love actually sometimes on doing those launch events, is engaging a new audience, people that maybe where we've typically done this with like publications and publishers, and we've done loads of London events, but then we look at something like a Northern event, and instead, like, you've got this brand new in the room audience, you know, people that have read the articles, engaged online, but they've just never come down to London. And now they get a chance to interact with, you know, the voices of the brand. And a lot of the people that, you know, do engage with the London events will still go to the Northern ones, you know, maybe big name speakers that you as a brand bring up north as well. So they get a chance to ask them questions in the room, give them opportunity to network, expand their, you know, who in their region that they can reach out to as well. And that's great. And it's really nice to see like a new community fostered. Yeah. And once you've done all that validating on a launch event, then the process becomes the same on then looking at content. And typically a lot of the content will look the same, but there will be slight differences as well. And I think tonality as well changes when you're maybe looking at the actual writing. And it's still professional, but I think that maybe some of the approach does change from... I liked it, especially with maybe some Northern events where they're smaller than the London partnered events. Like to make it feel a bit more in the room and intimate, if that makes sense. Like being there there will be so much value. Like this is a, you know, you need to be here kind of thing. If we're looking at trying to make a launch event successful, there's all the factors across all the departments. So commercially, what was the target and how well have we done? How many delegates did we have attend? What were some of the names that you brought to in terms of content? But I would say you feel it in the room, which is never a metric. You can sense if an event has done well. I think that's generally how as producers we tend to see if our event has done okay is, you know, what
that post-event buzz.
Room, that pulse. And I know that vibe doesn't count as a metric, but the vibe works. But I think that whether an event is successful, those metrics come down to things like delegate numbers, commercial, like how much sponsorship was on, what was the engagement, and then your feedback. Your feedback is the main bit, and that's where event feedback is really important, especially for a launch event, because you really want to capture how did it feel on the day? Do you want to do this event again? Is there a possibility for expansion? Can you have other Northern events? If I'm looking at a Northern event, that's where most of my experience is. So that's generally what I speak to. But I would say looking at that feedback is really key for our role. And then we can then put forward further business case. But anyway, I've talked so much about launch events that we haven't even started on legacy yet. But I know that you've worked with so many publishers on their kind of really big shows, events that have been going on for a number of years, have a really good built-in audience. And that has its own challenges to do it every year.
Yeah, I would say, look, it makes your life slightly easier when you're a producer and the brand is well known.
Yeah.
Especially, I think I really noticed when I went from a publication that was really well regarded in the sector to one where doing events that didn't have a publication backing behind it, and then going back to a publisher event, I was like, oof, I think I prefer this. But it's just more that you've got an editor who can help you as well, who understands the content. I've always actually been quite close with the editors I've worked with, and really seen each other as like a bouncing of ideas and knowledge sharing, which kind of is nice because sometimes as a producer you can feel a bit isolated.
I think if you do work in a publication, you have an editor. Yeah. I always think that producers and editors being best friends, basically, really key.
Yeah, because if you're not, then you're constantly clashing on what you think is good and what they think is good. If that is not matching, then you're bumping heads essentially constantly on what a good program looks like, but you don't really want to be doing that.
Yeah. But your program, like our programs, need to relate to the brand voice as well. It's an extension of the brand, and we need to align with what they're saying, in articles, online, in print if they're printing, with what we're saying on stage. We can't say, if they've said, put out this big statement about something that's happening in the industry, we can't then go on stage and say, well, that's a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
No, completely fair. And I guess the thing with legacy, I do actually always love joining a new event that's been running for a while and almost like adding my little bits to it, or I don't know, my energy, my little quirkiness to it. Because I do think it refreshes the event, or it's coming in with, I tend to come in with a different pair of eyes to it and seeing things differently. And to be fair, like I'm quite thankful that I've always been given quite free rein. All the directors have always just said like, look, this is your event now, run with it. But what happens is then when you have to do it again, you start just being like, well, I know the topic, or okay. It's harder to come up with new cool ideas. You'll find some, but you do notice that kind of like spark isn't as strong as maybe the first time you took over that event. And then you're constantly hesitant of being like, I don't want to make this event become the same thing over and over, copy and paste. And maybe overthinking that sometimes. But I think as producers, we are naturally just curious people. So when you start feeling you're almost too knowledgeable in that sense, your research calls become a bit more of like, yeah, I already know this. You would never say that to a speaker, but...
I mean, I was going to ask, like, how does, let's say you delivered the one event, let's say you've done the next year, you do research, but how does research change? Because like, especially if you're looking at a third edition of doing the same event, and you've done it twice now, you've done 2 production processes, you've done 2 research processes, you've absorbed all the information over the last 2 years. Now it's time for the third one. How do you approach it differently?
I think it's more about you end up having the same network of people, right? And they're your friendlies, as we kind of say most of the time. And making sure that you're engaging with new people that aren't your usual suspects. That because then you are getting to hear from others. So maybe I sometimes run through the delegate list, and if there's people who have attended but I've not engaged with them from a speaking point of view, then engage them, because they at the end of the day were the audience members. So what did you like? What you didn't like? And actually what I try to do is always think, what are sort of the top 2 or 3 new things I want to add to this event, and have quite clear how I want to make one little thing quite noticeable from one year to the next. Mainly because I think sometimes, especially I've been working a lot of events that are trying to grow really fast. And I think it just becomes that everyone is trying to do a million new things to the event because we need to make it 3 times bigger than the year before. And I'm like, we can add, it kind of gets drowned by everything that we're trying to do. And no one's going to notice the one new cool thing that we've actually spent 2 months working on because we've added all these other things as well. So in my opinion, I think it's quite important just to do like 1 or 2 things that make the event slightly different, whether it's, we've tried to do the networking different. We've added, I don't know, a game. We've added some workshops, whatever it is, but make it quite distinguishable that this year we tried this one new thing.
There's a phrase that I'm seeing a lot, and about the experience economy. Do you know much about this?
No, go for it.
No, it's more about how events is changing from just maybe that kind of standard approach before to now, like you say, things are getting bigger, better, really thinking about that delegate experience. And you definitely see it with, events that are going every year and have been going for a number of years. They're putting in more bells and whistles. They're thinking about that delegate experience and the overall look of the event. You're not just seeing standard, like exhibition stands anymore. You're seeing these like massive, beautiful buildings almost. Like I remember I think I went to, which one was it? I can't remember. I went to an events industry trade show, and some of these stands, they were like 3 stories high or something. And I was like, this is insane. But thinking more about the overall look. And I think that also comes into some of our stuff with content. How are we changing things on stage, which we will cover at some point. But yeah, I think it's definitely with legacy though that you need to change it up.
Yeah, you need to change something.
Aspects. So, but it comes into our research when you're looking at that. What did you not like about the event? What could we do better? And we do hear those nuggets of information. I didn't like the registration process. I didn't like how I got my badge. There was no coffee on the show floor. Like things like that. We do get those. We
do, and you have to end up smiling and be like, cool. Like, thank you. Not really my doing, but fine.
I think it can be a misconception that all we ask about is content.
Yeah. No.
We ask about what's going to get you in the door. And those are, whether it's a launch or a legacy event, we want to make sure that we need to ask the question, how do we keep engaging the audience? And it doesn't just come down to what's on stage, it comes into that overall experience.
Yeah, I think also with legacy, it's important to keep your eye out on who your competitors are and what they're doing.
Yes.
Because if we're sticking to the same kind of, because it's worked for us a few years, but someone else is creating a whole new launch event that is actually tackling what the market currently wants and what the delegates currently want, then your event becomes just obsolete to an extent if you're not careful enough. So I think, keeping an eye out on what others are doing and constantly checking that the event that we are creating still has a purpose within the market.
No. Have you ever been there when an event has gone stale, when you've realised that event has maybe had its last edition? I think I have.
Really, I think I've seen where I could sense it was coming, but I've never been there when it's fully been out of it.
It's the phrase. It's like it's their last winter.
Oh, yeah.
And you can sense, but it's a market shift, isn't it?
It
is. And whether it's maybe not like a flagship event, but maybe it's a smaller event that's more topic focused rather than market focused, and that topic is dying a death, or maybe all the solutions have happened or something, but there's no market interest anymore, and then you can see that commercially it's no longer viable, or maybe the commercial interest is there but the attendee interest isn't there anymore, and nobody's going to show up, and we're all just going to spend a lot of money.
Yeah. No, yeah, you are right. There are some events that or smaller scale events as well, I think, they appear when something's happened, which could be like a policy change or whatever. So this has become like the little boom where everyone's like, this is the next thing that we need to be working on and the most crucial thing. And then kind of slowly fades. And to be honest, like I work in sustainability, and it slightly worries me because politically there's quite the backlash.
Yeah.
And you could almost see some shifts already, like probably 4 years ago, ESG events. Everyone was doing an ESG event. There was 1 billion. And then all of a sudden, ESG was not as strong anymore. And you saw the change of the amount of events that targeted that, or everyone's now rebranding that event as something else.
The fringe events are coming off the calendars, aren't they? And you see that in whether it's, big kind of professional conference organisers, publishers, associations that maybe had a smaller ESG event in, one end of the year, they are starting to fade away. And I think there's more gravitation to the larger events. I think people are recognising the audience. Like there was so much offer on the, across the board all year round that they started gravitating to those larger events. But I think as well, like you said, at the end of the day with every event, commercial is the main thing. Yeah. The commercial interest. I think that commercially people are focusing on those larger events as well. And you said the boom is kind of over. The necessity is still there.
Yeah.
But there's not as many of those smaller events anymore.
And it goes changing. I think we always are having to find that balance between what, getting commercials. Our events need the commercials, and we're constantly told, commercials.
Where do we get sponsors?
Sponsors. And finding that of like, well, what's going to interest delegates? What's actually going to get people to attend? Because if we don't get people through the room, the sponsors are never going to sponsor that event again. And it's finding that balance of, is this event really worth it or not? We want to always make it as cool. There's so many times that you're like, oh, you're adding sessions just because you know that they're commercially interesting. But if that means this event keeps running because 80% of the content is still interesting to delegates and it's still what they want to hear about, then sure, I'll add the commercial ones to make sure this event is running next year.
Yeah. But what was it? Commercial content's changing as well. And that's something we can, again, it's more things to talk about. When we get in these conversations, we sit here and go, that's something else to chat about at some point. But yeah, so launch versus legacy, both very different approaches, very different outcomes and very different reasons.
Right, we'll see you next time, I guess.
Thanks so much for listening in to another episode of Speakeasy, and catch you next time.